Okay, 11th graders, here is video number 2. I've got it. It's kind of tricky getting it loaded where I can put it. I have to mount it to my clipboard, and that pressure from my clipboard on the screen kind of screws things up. But I think you should be able to see me okay. All right, okay. All right, we finished, ended up on page 249, the last reading. And we're in the chapter called The Gamblers, a 7-sided die. And so it's based on the idea that when you take in a Jew to live there, you're taking a gamble, right? The first little die started on page 244. That was about Max needed a haircut, so Liesel gave him a haircut. Number 2 was she began to collect newspapers for Max, especially those that were they were thrown away with crossword puzzles. And then the third die was on 248, that he realized he'd never been outside. He can't be outside anymore. So he said, please just go tell me what it's like. And as a result of her description of the cloud was like a rope in the sky looping the sun, that's what he painted down on the wall with himself and Liesel walking balancing on a tightrope toward the sun. Well, we're going to pick up at page 250. Number 4, the fourth side of the die. The Boxer, end of May. For Max Vandenberg, there was cool cement and plenty of time to spend with it. The minutes were cruel. Hours were punishing. Standing above him all the moments of awakeness was the hand of time, and it didn't hesitate to wring him out. It smiled and squeezed and let him live. What great malice there could be in allowing something to live. Living is painful for him because it means living with his sense of guilt, putting these people at risk and the people that he's lost and had to leave. At least once a day, Hans Huberman would descend the basement steps and share a conversation. Rosa would occasionally bring a spare crust of bread. It was when Liesel came down, however, that Max found himself most interested in life again. Initially, he tried to resist, but it was harder every day that the girl appeared. Each time with a new weather report, either of pure blue sky, cardboard clouds, or a sun that had broken through like God sitting down after he'd eaten too much for his dinner. Sun broken through like God sitting down after he had too much for his dinner. That's a really interesting imagery there, people. Interesting. When he was alone, his most distinct feeling was of disappearance. All of his clothes were gray, whether they'd started out that way or not. From his pants to his woolen sweater to the jacket that dripped from him now like water. He often checked if his skin was flaking, for it was as if he were dissolving. What he needed was a series of new projects. The first was exercise. He started with push-ups, lying stomach down on the cool basement floor, then hoisting himself up. It felt like his arms snapped at each elbow, and he envisaged his heart seeping out of him and dropping pathetically to the ground. As a teenager in Stuttgart, he could reach 50 push-ups at a time. Now, at the age of 24, perhaps 15 pounds lighter than his usual weight, he could barely make it to 10. After a week, he was completing 3 sets, each of 16 push-ups and 22 sit-ups. When he was finished, he would sit against the basement wall with his paint can friends, feeling his pulse in his teeth. His muscles felt like cake. He wondered at times if pushing himself like this was even worth it. Sometimes, though, when his heartbeat neutralized and his body became functional again, he would turn off the lamp and stand in the darkness of the basement. He was 24, but he could still fantasize. In the blue corner, he quietly commentated, we have the champion of the world, the Aryan masterpiece, the Führer. He breathed and turned. And in the red corner, we have the Jewish rat-faced challenger, Max Vandenberg. Around him, it all materialized. White light lowered itself into a boxing ring, and a crowd stood and murmured. That magical sound of many people talking all at once. How could every person there have so much to say at the same time? The ring itself was perfect. Perfect canvas, lovely ropes. Even the stray hairs of each thickening string were flawless, gleaming in the tight white light. The room smelled like cigarettes and beer. Diagonally across, Adolf Hitler stood in the corner with his entourage, his legs poked out from a red and white robe with a black swastika burned into its back. His mustache was knitted to his face. Words were whispered to him from his trainer, Goebbels. He bounced foot to foot, and he smiled. He smiled loudest when the ring announcer listed his many achievements, which were all vociferously applauded by the adoring crowd. Undefeated, the ringmaster proclaimed, over many a Jew and over any other threat to the German ideal. Herr Führer, he concluded, we salute you. The crowd, mayhem. Next, when everyone had settled down, came the challenger. The ringmaster swung over toward Max, who stood alone in the challenger's corner. No robe, no entourage, just a lonely young Jew with dirty breath, a naked chest, and tired hands and feet. Naturally, his shorts were gray. He too moved from foot to foot, but it was kept to at a minimum to conserve energy. He'd done a lot of sweating in the gym to make the weight. The challenger, sang the ringmaster, of, and he paused for effect, Jewish blood. The crowd oohed like human ghouls. Weighing in at. The rest of the speech was not heard. It was overrun with the abuse from the bleachers, and Max watched as his opponent was disrobed and came to the middle to hear the rules and shake hands. Guten Tag, Herr Hitler, Max nodded, but the Führer only showed him his yellow teeth, then covering them up again with his lips. Gentlemen, a stout referee in black pants and a blue shirt began. A bow tie was fixed to his throat. First and foremost, we want a good, clean fight. He addressed only the Führer now. Unless, of course, Herr Hitler, you begin to lose. Should this occur, I will be quite willing to turn a blind eye to any unconscionable tactics you might employ to grind this piece of Jewish stench and filth into the canvas. He nodded with great courtesy. Is that clear? The Führer spoke his first word then. Crystal. To Max, the referee extended a warning. As for you, my Jewish chum, I'd watch my step very closely if I were you, very closely indeed. And they were sent back to their respective corners. A brief quiet ensued. The bell. First out was the Führer, awkward-legged and bony, running at Max and jabbing him firmly in the face. The crowd vibrated, the bell still in their ears, and their satisfied smells hurtled the ropes. The smoky breath of Hitler steamed from his mouth, and his hands bucked at Max's face, collecting him several times on the lips, the nose, the chin, and Max had still not ventured out of his corner. To absorb the punishment, he held up his hands, but the Führer then aimed at his ribs, his kidneys, his lungs. Oh, the eyes, the Führer's eyes. They were so deliciously brown, like Jews' eyes, and they were so determined that even Max stood transfixed for a moment as he caught sight of them between the healthy blur of punching gloves. There was only one round, and it lasted hours, and for the most part nothing changed. The Führer pounded away at the punching bag Jew. Jewish blood was everywhere, like red rain clouds on the sky-white canvas at their feet. Eventually, Max's knees began to buckle, his cheekbones silently moaned, and the Führer's delighted face still chipped away, until, depleted, beaten, and broken, the Jew flopped to the floor. First, a roar, then silence. The referee counted. He had a gold tooth and a plethora of nostril hair. Slowly, Max Vandenberg, the Jew, rose to his feet and made himself upright. His voice wobbled. An invitation. Come on, Führer, he said. And this time, when Adolf Hitler set upon his Jewish counterpart, Max stepped aside and plunged him into the corner. He punched him 7 times, aiming on each occasion for only one thing, the mustache. With the 7th punch, he missed. It was the Führer's chin that sustained the blow. All at once, Hitler hit the ropes and creased forward, landing on his knees. This time there was no count. The referee flinched in the corner. The audience sank down, back to their beer. On his knees, the Führer tested himself for blood and straightened his hair left to right. When he returned to his feet, much to the approval of the 1,000-strong crowd, he edged forward and did something quite strange. He turned his back on the Jew and took the gloves from his fists. The crowd was stunned. He's given up, someone whispered. But within moments, Adolf Hitler was standing on the ropes, and he was addressing the arena. Excuse me just a sec. He was addressing the arena. My fellow Germans, he called, you can see something here tonight, can't you? Bare-chested, victory-eyed, he pointed over at Max. You can see that what we face is something far more sinister and powerful than we ever imagined. Can you see that? They answered, Yes, Führer. Can you see that this enemy has found its ways, its despicable ways, through our armor, and that clearly I cannot stand up here alone and fight him? The words were visible. They dropped from his mouth like jewels. Look at him. Take a good look. They looked at the bloodied Max Vandenberg. As we speak, he is plotting his way into your neighborhood. He's moving in next door. He's infesting you with his family and is about to take you over. Hitler glanced at him a moment with disgust. He will soon own you until it is he who stands not at the counter of your grocery shop, but sits in the back smoking his pipe. Before you know it, you'll be working for him at minimum wage while he can hardly walk from the weight in his pockets. Will you simply stand there and let him do this? Will you stand by as your leaders did in the past, when they gave your land to everybody else, when they sold your country for the price of a few signatures? Will you stand out there powerless, or, and now he stepped one rung higher, will you climb up into this ring with me? Max shook. Horror stuttered in his stomach. Adolf finished him. Will you climb in here so that we can defeat this enemy together? In the basement of 33 Himmel Street, Max Vandenberg could feel the fists of an entire nation. One by one they climbed into the ring and beat him down. They made him bleed. They let him suffer. Millions of them, until one last time when he gathered himself to his feet. He watched the next person climb through the ropes. It was a girl, and as she slowly crossed the canvas, he noticed a tear torn down her left cheek. In her right hand was a newspaper. The crossword, she gently said, is empty, and she held it out to him. Dark. Nothing but dark now. Just basement. Just Jew. That's interesting. Interesting way of depicting how Hitler pulled everybody into it and put all the blame on him and tried to make it very interesting, but also how the girl becomes kind of the end of the nightmare or the fascination, whatever. Okay. Number 5, the new dreams a few nights later. It was afternoon. Liesel came down the basement steps. Max was halfway through his push-ups. She watched a while without his knowledge, and when she came and sat with him, he stood up and leaned back against the wall. Did I tell you, he asked her, that I've been having a new dream lately? Liesel shifted a little to see his face. But I dream this when I'm awake. He motioned to the glowless kerosene lamp. Sometimes I turn out the light. Then I stand here and wait. For what? Max corrected her. Not for what. For whom? For a few moments, Liesel said nothing. It was one of those conversations that require some time to elapse between exchanges. Who do you wait for? Max did not move. The Führer. He was very matter-of-fact about this. That's why I'm in training. The push-ups? That's right. He walked to the concrete stairway. Every night, I sit in the dark and the Führer comes down those steps. He walks down and he and I, we fight for hours. Liesel was standing now. Who wins? At first he was going to answer that no one did, but then he noticed the paint cans, the drop sheets, and the glowing pile of newspapers in the periphery of his vision. He watched the words, the long clouds, and the figures on the wall. I do, he said. It was as though he'd opened her palm, given her the words, and closed it up again. Under the ground in Molking, Germany, 2 people stood and spoke in a basement. It sounds like the beginning of a joke. There was a Jew and a German standing in a basement, right? This, however, was no joke. Number 6, The Painters, early June. Another of Max's projects was the remainder of Mein Kampf. Each page was gently stripped from the book and laid out on the floor to receive a coat of paint. It was then hung up to dry and replaced between the front and back covers. When Liesel came down one day after school, she found Max, Rosa, and her papa all painting the various pages. Many of them were already hanging from a drawn-out string with pegs, just as they must have done for the Standover Man. All 3 people looked up and spoke. Hi, Liesel. Here's a brush, Liesel. About time, Salmanch. Where have you been so long? Isn't that just like Rosa? As she started painting, Liesel thought about Max Vandenberg fighting the Fuhrer, exactly as he'd explained it. Basement Visions, June 1941. Punches are thrown, the crowd climbs out of the walls. Max and the Fuhrer fight for their lives, each rebounding off the stairway. There's blood in the Fuhrer's mustache, as well as in his part line, on the right side of his head. Come on, Fuhrer, says the Jew. He waves him forward. Come on, Fuhrer. When the visions dissipated and she finished her first page, Papa winked at her. Mama castigated her for hogging the paint. Max examined each and every page, perhaps watching what he planned to produce on them. Many months later, he would also paint over the cover of that book and give it a new title, after one of the stories he would write and illustrate inside it. That afternoon, in the secret ground below 33 Himmel Street, the Hubermans, Liesel Memminger, and Max Vandenberg prepared the pages of The Word Shaker. It felt good to be a painter. So it's just so symbolic, people, that they're taking the very pages of Mein Kampf and painting them over, and they're going to write a new book. Max is going to write it, and they're doing it together. And that's really a depiction of what's going on here. They're not letting Hitler's lies just decimate everything. They're taking what he's given them, and they're making something new out of it. And that's kind of what's happening between them. That's really cool. It's neat that Rose is involved with that as well. Side number 7, The Showdown, June 24th. Then came the 7th side of the die, 2 days after Germany invaded Russia, 3 days before Britain and the Soviets joined forces. 7. You roll and watch it coming, realizing completely that this is no regular die. You claim it to be bad luck, but you've known all along it had to come. You brought it into the room. The table could smell it on your breath. The Jew was sticking out of your pocket from the outset. He's smeared onto your lapel, and the moment you roll, you know it's a 7, the one thing that somehow finds a way to hurt you. It lands. It stares you in each eye, miraculous and loathsome, and you turn away with it feeding on your chest. Just bad luck. That's what you say, of no consequence. That's what you make yourself believe, because deep down you know that this small piece of changing fortune is a signal of things to come. You hide a Jew, you pay. Somehow or other, you must. In hindsight, Liesel told herself that it was not such a big deal. Perhaps it was because so much more had happened by the time she wrote her story in the basement. In the great scheme of things, she reasoned that Rosa being fired by the mayor and his wife was not bad luck at all. It had nothing whatsoever to do with hiding Jews. It had everything to do with the greater context of the war. At the time, though, there was most definitely a feeling of punishment. The mayor and his wife are no longer, they're the last ones to have washing, and now they're not doing it anymore. The beginning was actually a week or so earlier than June 24th. Liesel scavenged a newspaper for Max Vandenberg as she always did. She reached into a garbage can just off Munich Street and tucked it under her arm. Once she delivered it to Max, he'd commenced his first reading. He glanced across at her and pointed to a picture on the front page. Isn't this who's washing and ironing you deliver? Liesel came over from the wall. She'd been writing the word argument 6 times next to Max's picture of the top ropey cloud and the dripping sun. Max handed her a paper and she confirmed it. That's him. When she went on to read the article, Heinz Hermann, the mayor, was quoted as saying that although this war was progressing splendidly, the people of Molking, like all responsible Germans, should take adequate measures and prepare for the possibility of harder times. You never know, he stated, what our enemies are thinking or how they will try to debilitate us. A week later, the mayor's words came to nasty fruition. Liesel, as she always did, showed up at Grande Strasse and read from The Whistler on the floor of the mayor's library. The mayor's wife showed no signs of abnormality, or let's be frank, no additional signs, until it was time to leave. So she does behave abnormally, but no more than usual. This time when she offered Liesel The Whistler, she insisted on the girl taking it. Please, she almost begged. The book was held out in a tight, measured fist. Take it. Please, take it. Liesel, touched by the strangeness of this woman, couldn't bear to disappoint her again. The gray-covered book with its yellowing pages found its way into her hand, and she began to walk the corridor. As she was about to ask for the washing, the mayor's wife gave her a final look of bathrobed sorrow. She reached into the chest of drawers and withdrew an envelope. Her voice, lumpy from lack of use, coughed out the words, "I'm sorry. It's for your mama." Liesl stopped breathing. She knows what this means. And if she loses the wash, she loses the chance to sit in that library as well. She was suddenly aware of how empty her feet felt inside her shoes. Something ridiculed her throat. She trembled. When finally she reached out and took possession of the letter, she noticed the sound of the clock in the library. Grimly, she realized that clocks don't make a sound that even remotely resemble ticking, talking. It was more the sound of a hammer, upside down, hacking methodically at the earth. It was the sound of a grave. If only mine was ready now, she thought, because Liesl Memminger at that moment wanted to die. When the others had canceled, it hadn't hurt so much. There was always the mayor, his library, and her connection with his wife. Also, this was the last one, the last rope. Also, this was the last one, the last hope, gone. This time it felt like the greatest betrayal. How could she face her mama? For Rose, the few scraps of money she still helped in various alleyways, an extra handful of flour, a piece of fat. Elsa Herman was dying now herself to get rid of her. Liesl could see it somewhere in the way she hugged the robe a little tighter. The clumsiness of sorrow still kept at her close proximity, but clearly she wanted this to be over. "Tell your mama," she spoke again. Her voice was adjusting now as one sentence turned into two, "that we're sorry." She started shepherding the girl toward the door. "And I think she is sorry. I think she's also sad, because Liesl's a connection for her. She's a sad woman, but Liesl is a genuine connection. She's able to serve Liesl in a way and to be connected to another human being. And this is a woman with very few connections. That we're sorry," she started shepherding the girl toward the door. Liesl felt it now in the shoulders, the pain, the impact of final rejection. "That's it?" she asked internally. "You just boot me out?" Slowly she picked up her empty bag and edged toward the door. Once outside, she turned and faced the mayor's wife for the second to the last time that day. She looked her in the eyes with an almost savage brand of pride. "Danke schön," she said, and Ilse Herman smiled in a rather useless, beaten way. It means many thanks, sincere thanks. "If you ever want to come just to read," the woman lied, or at least the girl in her shocked, saddened state perceived it as a lie. "You're very welcome." At that moment, Liesl was amazed by the width of the doorway. There was so much space. Why did people need so much space to get through the door? Had Rudy been here, he'd have called her an idiot. It was to get all their stuff inside. "Goodbye," the girl said, and slowly, with great morosity, the door was closed. Liesl did not leave. For a long time she sat on the steps and watched Molking. It was neither warm nor cool, and the town was clear and still. Molking was in a jar. She opened the letter. In it, Mayor Heinz Hermann diplomatically outlined exactly why he had to terminate the services of Rosa Huberman. For the most part, he explained that he would be a hypocrite if he maintained his small luxuries while advising others to prepare for harder times. When she eventually stood and walked home, her moment of reaction came once again when she saw the Steiner Schneider Meister sign on Munich Street. Her sadness left her, and she was overwhelmed with anger. "That bastard mayor," she whispered. "That pathetic woman." The fact that harder times were coming was surely the best reason for keeping Rosa employed. But no, they fired her. At any rate, she decided they could do with their own blasted washing. They could do their own blasted washing and ironing like normal people, like poor people. In her hand, the whistler tightened. "So you give me the book," the girl said, "for pity, to make yourself feel better." The fact that she'd also been offered the book prior to that day mattered little. Because really, she did want her to have the book, and it was a farewell gift. But now it feels like she's covering her own conscience by giving her the book. She turned as she had once before and marched back to 8 Grande Strasse. The temptation to run was immense, but she refrained so that she'd have enough in reserve for the words. When she arrived, she was disappointed that the mayor himself was not there. No car was slotted nicely on the side of the road, which was perhaps a good thing. Had it been there, there was no telling what she might have done in this moment of rich versus poor. 2 steps at a time, she reached the door and banged it hard enough to hurt. She enjoyed the small fragments of pain. Just a second. Okay, just a sec. 25, okay. Evidently, the mayor's wife was shocked when she saw her again. Her fluffy hair was slightly wet, and her wrinkles widened when she noticed the obvious fury on Liesel's usually pallid face. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out, which was handy, really, for it was Liesel who possessed the talking. "You think," she said, "you can buy me off with this book?" Her voice, though shaken, hooked at the woman's throat. The glittering anger was thick and unnerving, but she toiled through it. She worked herself up even further, to the point where she needed to wipe the tears from her eyes. "You give me this sowmensch of a book and think it'll make everything good when I go and tell my mama that we've just lost our last one, while you sit here in your mansion?" The mayor's wife's arms, they hung. Her face slipped. Liesel, however, did not buckle. She sprayed her words directly into the woman's eyes. "You and your husband, sitting up here." Now she became spiteful, more spiteful and evil than she thought herself capable. The injury of words. Yes, the brutality of words. She summoned them from someplace she only now recognized and hurled them at Ilse Hermann. "It's about time," she informed her, "that you do your own stinking washing anyway. It's about time you face the fact that your son is dead. He got killed, he got strangled and cut up more than 20 years ago. Or did he freeze to death? Either way, he's dead. He's dead, and it's pathetic that you sit here shivering in your own house to suffer for it. You think you're the only one?" Immediately, her brother was next to her. He whispered for her to stop, but he too was dead and not worth listening to. "He died in the train. They buried him in the snow." Liesel glanced at him, but she could not make herself stop. Not yet. "This book," she went on. She shoved the boy down the steps, making him fall. "I don't want it." Her words were quieter now, but still just as hot. She threw the whistler at the woman's slippered feet, hearing the clack of it as it landed in the cement. "I don't want your miserable book." Now she managed it. She fell silent. Her throat was barren now. No words for miles. Her brother, holding his knee, disappeared. After a miscarriaged pause, the mayor's wife edged forward and picked up the book. She was battered and beaten up, and not from smiling this time. Liesel could see it on her face. Blood leaked down from her nose and licked at her lips. Her eyes had blackened. Cuts had opened up, and a series of wounds were rising to the surface of her skin. All from the words, from Liesel's words. Book in hand, and straightening from the crouch to a standing hunch, Ilse Hermann began the process again of saying sorry, but the sentence did not make it out. "Slap me." "Slap me," Liesel thought. "Come on, slap me." Ilse Hermann didn't slap her. She merely retreated backward into the ugly air of her beautiful house, and Liesel once again was left alone, clutching at the steps. She was afraid to turn around because she knew that when she did, the glass casing of Molking had now been shattered, and she'd be glad of it. As her last order of business, she read the letter one more time, and when she was close to the gate, she screwed it up as tightly as she could and threw it at the door as if it were a rock. I have no idea what the book thief expected, but the ball of paper hit the mighty sheet of wood and twittered back down the steps. It landed at her feet. "Typical," she stated, kicking it into the grass. "Useless." On the way home this time, she imagined the fate of that paper the next time it rained, when it mended the glass house of Molking was turned upside down. When the mended glass house of Molking was turned upside down, she could already see the words dissolving letter by letter till there was nothing left, just paper, just earth. I'm going to keep reading here, people, until for the next 2 pages. At home, so as luck would have it, when Liesel walked through the door, Rosa was in the kitchen. "And," she said, "where's the washing?" "No washing today," Liesel told her. Rosa came and sat down at the kitchen table. She knew. Suddenly, she appeared much older. Liesl imagined what she'd looked like if she'd untied her bun to let it fall out onto her shoulders, a gray towel of elastic hair. "What did you do there, you little Sowmensch?" The sentence was numb. She could not muster her usual venom. "It was my fault," Liesl answered. "Completely. I insulted the mayor's wife and told her to stop crying over her dead son. I called her pathetic. That was when they fired you. Here." She walked to the wooden spoons, grabbed a handful, and placed them in front of her. "Take your pick." Rosa touched one and picked it up, but she did not wield it. "I don't believe you." Liesl was torn between distress and total mystification. The one time she desperately wanted a Vachen and she couldn't get one? "It's my fault." "It's not your fault," Mama said, and she even stood and stroked Liesl's waxy, unwashed hair. "I know you wouldn't say those things." "I said them." "All right, you said them." As Liesl left the room, she could hear the wooden spoons clicking back into position in the metal jar that held them. By the time she reached her bedroom, the whole lot of them, the jar included, were thrown to the floor. Rose is reacting. Later, she walked down to the basement where Max was standing in the dark, most likely boxing with the Fuhrer. "Max," the light dimmed on. A red coin floated in the corner. "Can you teach me how to do the push-ups?" Max showed her and occasionally lifted her torso to help, but despite her bony appearance, Liesl was strong and could hold her body weight nicely. She didn't count how many she could do, but that night, in the glow of the basement, the book thief completed enough push-ups to make her hurt for several days. Even when Max advised her that she had already done too many, she continued. "She wants to hurt. Why?" "I think she wants to punish herself." In bed, she read with Papa, who could tell something was wrong. It was the first time in a month that he'd come in and sat with her, and she was comforted, if only slightly. Somehow Hans Huberman always knew what to say, when to stay and when to leave her be. Perhaps Liesl was the one thing he was a true expert at. "Is it the washing?" he asked. Liesl shook her head. Papa hadn't shaved for a few days, and he rubbed the scratchy whiskers every 2 or 3 minutes. His silver eyes were flat and calm, slightly warm, as they always were when it came to Liesl. When the reading petered out, Papa fell asleep. It was then that Liesl spoke what she'd wanted to say all along. "Papa," she whispered, "I think I'm going to hell." Her legs were warm, her knees were cold. She remembered the nights when she'd wet the bed and Papa had washed the sheets and taught her the letters of the alphabet. Now his breathing blew across the blanket, and she kissed his scratchy cheek. "You need a shave," she said. "You're not going to hell," Papa replied. He heard her. He heard her. For a few minutes, she watched his face. Then she lay back down, leaned on him, and together they slept, very much in Munich, but somewhere on the 7th side of Germany's die. Interesting, people. Interesting. Okay. I'm going to stop there. Thanks, you guys. Thank you. Thank you. Talk to you later. Have a good one, people. It takes a little... Sometimes this phone doesn't stop recording, so bear with me if you have to watch me for just a second. Come on. Come on, sucker. What's going on here? Come on. Dang it, just a sec. Shoot, it's frozen. Come on.